Taro, Tishida. Nice to meet you guys.
Second.
I'm Seiji, speaking second, he, him.
Thank you.
I'm Natsuki, speaking third, he, they.
Perfect. And team of position.
I'm Mila, she, her, speaking first.
Thank you.
I'm Lana, she, her, speaking second and reply.
Thank you.
Mine's he, him, speaking third.
Thank you. Perfect. 3 bits of housekeeping for myself. I'll be timing the round speeches and indicating time markers via a clap at the first 7, twice at 8, and at the conclusion of 8:15, I'll clap twice again and indicate that's when you should end your speeches. But I highly recommend voting to time themselves, as my focus will be on the round. Second thing, we are quite blessed, I guess, to have a lot of observers in the room. Please do maintain decorum and try not to communicate with the relevant observers. Third, there is a recording feature going on here. Can we have a positive confirmation and consent from both teams that they're happy for this?
Yep.
Perfect. At any point in which you would want this to be changed, please indicate this at the start of your speech. And one final point, I encourage both teams to take POIs, take an Opp Win as part of WSDC. If there are any auditory accessibility concerns that you want us to reflect as part of not disturbing your speech, please do make that clear. Otherwise, you'll follow normal WSDC procedure. Does anyone have any queries before we start? On that basis, I'd like to invite the first speaker of the proposition to begin the debate. Here.
Am I audible at this point?
Yes.
Thank you. When in a rap battle, people often say, your mama this, your mama that. People laugh, people around you also make fun of you. In the pop world, this is a joke. This is entertainment. But for many, like me, it wasn't a joke. It was a destruction of my dignity. We're proud to stand on proposition. I'll talk about 3 things in my speech. Firstly, on unjustful state. Secondly, on ingraining bad ideas. Before that, I want to talk about framing. Firstly, on frame, what does the prominence of this look like? We think this is largely the massive popularity of increase, often the intentional way to gain attention for many artists. Secondly, what does the counterfactual look like? We think it can be resolved by 2 things. Firstly, on private conflict, but secondly, we think reasonable discussions in public will happen. But note here that things like violence and physical harm is unlikely on their side of the house. This is for 2 reasons. Firstly, on regulation and laws, we think people are likely to follow these things. But secondly, on private protection, like things like bodyguards also exist for many artists. We think like things like fighting each other in like dark places is unlikely to happen. Third, an important frame on small artists. We think that this context is only about big actors. This is because small artists instigating conflict against bigger actors is never going to gain attention in the first place. We think this debate is about big actors. With that being said, I want to move on to my first argument on why this leads to unjustful hate as a result of associations. 3 layers to this argument. First layer, on why does this create hate? There are 2 reasons why this is true. A, direct harm. People like family members are harmed. Kendrick Lamar literally made a 10-minute song talking about the mother, father, and son of Drake and literally making fun of those people. Also, people like fans are often harmed in these conflicts directly. Often, artists call out the other fans as being uncool or lame to gain attention and to gain leverage over other fans. B, even without things like association, we think that simply being involved with that person or associated with that person actively creates harm. Like fans, you listening to Drake or you having Drake in your profile bio often means that people make fun of you for listening to Drake. But also family and friends are also harmed. You being part of their life, like you being the mother of Drake, it often creates harm. But also people like living in local communities are also made fun of because artists often mention these places in their songs to make fun of them. Which means that fans who are also involved in that area are often harmed. Second layer on why this is uniquely bad. 2 things. Firstly, on scale and intensity is far greater in our context because artists actively allow this and instigate it to happen. This doesn't normally happen in things like rivalry between artists because artists don't mention this in the first place. Artists saying it intentionally and pushing for it is a unique tipping point. It creates a unique validation for fans to act upon this and to create active harm. Crucially, artists cannot control how their fans act. So at the point in which when this happens, this creates immense harm. Secondly, on sense of direct attack when both sides criticize, fans feel that they need to defend themselves. If not, when they don't retaliate against the other side, it creates a perception that their side is weak and losing. The impact of this is threefold. Firstly, on mental harm. This leads to things like bullying in places like schools or even in like universities. If you get called losers if you are fans of Drake, this has happened many times after the Drake and Kendrick conflict. Also, we think things like social media hate and death threats often happens to fans as well who are following Drake or even to Drake himself as well. These things are anonymous and cannot be regulated. Also, things like, an example of this, like Sabrina Carpenter fans being sent death threats by Olivia Rodrigo fans for supporting Home Wrecker. Second, on physical harm. Things like doxing have happened in the past, like Eminem's daughter being stalked by fans who hate Eminem has happened. But note that all of these are extreme because people idolize their celebrities. Third, impact on principle. Consumers who did nothing wrong and just simply listen to their music just are harmed as well. This is a principal harm because they never opted into this or created this harm for themselves. They never agreed upon this. Before I move on to my second argument on ingraining bad ideals in daily life, I'll take that deal on.
If your friend supports a problematic person like Jay-Z who was a domestic abuser, isn't it good that you know that your friend did this? You can call them out and actually talk about it and say that this behavior doesn't happen again.
Like I talked about, many of the promises are fake. This culture often creates things as lying and just simply making fun of the opposition for the culture, for the fame, for the clout. This is something that cannot happen on your side of the house. This is not an active accountability measure that exists on your side of the house. With that being said, I want to talk about ingraining bad ideas in daily life. Like a characterization of this is that things like rap battles on YouTube, like Kendrick Lamar beef, making fun of other artists are something that are popularized, largely consumed, and perceived as cool. With that being said, first layer on why this is likely to happen. 3 reasons under this. Firstly, on increase in instigation of conflict. So you feel that you get attention when you do these things in daily life. For students, if you do like a rap battle in a school cafeteria, there are many people watching you. If you make a good line or something, you get clout. There's a huge incentive for you to do this and start a conflict in the first place. But secondly, the way conflict happens is much worse is much worse on their side of the house because the nature of rap battles or things like that is a very problematic way. Like you're allowed to do things like lie or sacrifice accuracy for the fact that you make fun of other people, or you're allowed to make fun of family members or things like that, something that doesn't happen in normal conflicts, but it simply just lowers the burden to make fun of other people, right? Things like bullying, you have a rational idea that these things are bad, but the fact that this is created as entertainment and something that can be done, and is something that is done by popular artists, create a reason for young people and children to often do this as well. C, the way we resolve conflict is also worse on their side of the house because you're unlikely to actually resolve the conflict once it happens. Artists who do the same thing, who create these conflicts, never resolve these conflicts. And the reason for this is that because if they back out, they're perceived as weak and they have lost the conflict. And people on the ground who consume these types of media are likely to perceive this as well and are likely to follow this narrative and never resolve the conflict themselves. Why is pop culture unique in creating conflict? I know opposition is going to come up here and tell us that teachers are going to tell them to follow morals or not do these things in the first place. The reason why this is not true is for a few reasons. Firstly, you see pop culture to be cooler and modern than teachers and adults. The people who are telling you to not believe or things like that are people who are much older, who are less cool than people like Kendrick Lamar that you're listening to on social media and on Instagram. Secondly, it's harder to realize that it's bad in the first place. Things like bullying, like literally hitting someone or kicking someone, you know these things are bad. But the fact is that these things are created as pure entertainment or as a joke. This makes it easier for people to actually do this in the first place. C, it's more accessible. Most people watch these content on social media. Also, most people are not malevolent individuals, so they're not gang affiliated and don't know punching other people or stuff like that. But normal people are allowed to do these things because they consume things like normal music. What is the impact of this argument? Mental harm is, you face immense mental harm when you're made fun of. But crucially, it's really hard to opt out on their side of the house or like regulate this on off. This is true for two reasons. Firstly, it's perceived as cool and as a joke. As I told you, if you try opting out of this scenario, you're probably going to be perceived as someone that is uncool or like someone that is boring who is unwilling to participate in rap battles. This creates an incentive for you to stay in the conflict. Secondly, it's popular, right? Artists constantly create new beef and new content to allow this to happen, which means that insofar as you want to be trendy and stay on the trend in school, you're unlikely to leave this and opt out yourself. For all those reasons, we're very, very proud to stand on proposition.
I'd like to thank the first speaker of the proposition for his defining speech at a length of 8 minutes and 12 seconds. Now to invite the first opposition speaker to begin the opposition substantive case. Here.
Yeah.
Thanks so much.
Doesn't our team, don't you guys have
Oh, I have.
Can we get Kantaro's back and give that to them?
Thanks so much.
Thanks.
Alright, thank you.
Alright, can everyone hear me? Okay, then I'll start in a few seconds. Three, two, one. Drake was called out for being a pedophile and Kendrick for being abusive to his wife. I think the benefit of them being called out and of this change in the culture and the narrative and them actually getting in trouble and losing their sponsors outweighs any of the points of proposition here. Firstly, I'd like to frame this debate in a simple way, and that is to tell you that celebrity conflicts appear in two types. Firstly is the legitimate ones, and secondly just the PR beef. The legitimate ones seem like artists who generally dislike each other because of a few reasons. A, because they're simply in the same social circles, they have interactions with each other, and they simply don't like each other's characters. B, they're in the same field, and they're competing for the same audience. For example, they're both competing for the album of the year, which means there's already inherent tension between them. C, they're simply people who dislike each other, even if they don't have a valid reason, just from the first impression. But D, it's just they're very likely part of different dynasties and labels. For example, East and West Coast of rappers in the USA have a historical beef between them, and then people inherit this beef from their mentors and their idols. But the second type of beef is the PR beef, which is just engineered beef from PR teams to promote albums, products, and collabs, which happens but isn't as likely because it's very easy to spawn and it's quite boring because it's not as engaging for fans, because you can only engage in soft topics that both artists agree on, which is like someone smells, someone is rude to the way they're similar things. Now I want to move on to 4 main points of rebuttal. Firstly, onto their point about how this hurts the family of the person. Firstly, I'd like to note here that the family is likely to take a stance. They're probably likely to say, no, we don't support our son who raped this person. And if that is true, no fans will ever actually attack this person because they dissociate themselves. Secondly, even if they don't do this, for example, if they stay quiet or they keep supporting their son, their family member, we think it's quite okay for them to also receive some sort of canceling or hate from the fans because they are in fact enabling this behavior. But also, thirdly, I want to say here is that artists aren't even likely to attack other people from the family because this instead is engaging. Because if somebody only attacks someone's daughter, they seem weak. But why? Because why couldn't you attack the artist themselves? Are they good enough? Are you such a good artist you cannot find any dirt in them? You have to actually talk about the daughter, and you seem weak, and this doesn't make you winner of this conflict. But also, lastly, if it's something so horrible about their family, your PR team would never allow you to do this because they do some sort of accountability. Second thing I want to note is why these things are fake. Why these things that are called out are legitimate. Because if you talk about some things without evidence, you seem weak. Fans don't stop supporting. Fans stop supporting you. You lose these fans, and you cannot actually win. But if something is completely made up, you seem weak because you cannot actually find a reason why you are better than the other artists. Nobody wants to do this. Thirdly, on the mental harm of people and bullying on social media when people talk about it. I just want to say that people on social media are the type of people who go on Instagram comments and then approve hate comments about each other are just the type of people who would do this on any other video. If there wasn't this a rapper, they would still receive hate and do have hate comments. This doesn't change on their side at all. But also they can always get out of the conflict by saying they stop supporting the artist. And lately their point about doxing is simply hilarious. I have no idea how a random anonymous person from Canada who I'm fighting with, I can suddenly know all of their information as a regular user and dox them. And now fourthly, on their last last part, which is how this actually spill over to like conflicts in like schools. For example, there being cafeteria battles with like rap battles. I tell you that this is not why this is not a bad thing is because this is extremely easy to spot. Because if there's a rap battle inside the cafeteria, every single teacher and staff member can actually see this. These people can be detained, they can be expelled. Or for example, if it happens on online media, there are videos of that. When people have rap battles, they'll be filmed, it will be like starting social media. It's very easy to spot and blame and like these people to get their repercussions. On the other hand, if this bullying will take place in, for example, someone whispering like swear words to another person, it's very hard to prove, and this person isn't very likely to be detained in school, which means we actually have like less bullies in school on our side. I don't think it's your mic.
Yes or no? Do you agree that these celebrities have a cult-like following?
A cult-like following. I think some celebrities do have a cult-like following, and I think it's not necessary for every single fan to like disown their artist, because there will be like a brand canceling from other people who aren't inherently fans. But I think the large amount of fans also are likely to call someone out because sure they like Drake, but like firstly they are like a woman who actually doesn't like support someone being a pedophile and similar things. Now I'd like to move on to our argument here, which is on accountability. Okay, so firstly I'd like to talk about two things, capacity and incentive. Let's talk about capacity. We tell you that these people who are artists already know a lot of things that they could like secrets they could dig out on the other person. Why? Because they like move around the same social circles. They hang out and date celebrities. For example, look at Kim K, Ariana Grande, Timothée Chalamet. They all have like hang out with similar people. Why? Because these people can relate to them best. And if celebrities, they're normal people, they're scared that these normal people are only out for money and fame and similar things. And the implication of this is that they all the time hear things and they know secrets. This means they first can hear something about the other. That means that their friend knows something about a celebrity that they dislike, or a lot of people simply have same managers, so through them they can hear the dirt about these people. But B, even if they don't know the secrets at the moment, they have the capacity to find out, because they're very rich, they have PR teams. They can just send someone to observe the other person and dig something up. Now, why does incentive exclusively change on our side? Because in proposition, there's an incentive to simply call out this person once, because they're afraid they will be ostracized from their society, because they will be looked down upon from the other celebrities. The other celebrities will think they're really risky, they don't want to talk to you, because every single celebrity has some dirty secrets, and they're afraid that if they talk to you, all of their secrets will be out in the open, which means like people will ostracize you, and this isn't enough to persuade you to actually reveal this information. Now, how does this incentive exclusively change opposition? Because these beefs start small and they only scale up. These are conflicts who start because of like dislikes and tensions for our framing. But then what happens? They start small. Like for example, oh, I'm just a better rapper than you. For example, Kendrick and Jake, who are just like arguing who will be the next Michael Jackson. And then it starts like, oh, you smell your mama jokes. But it escalates to like people saying, oh, your girlfriend is not attractive. And over time, it escalates to someone calling out their dirty secrets, which looks like harassment, calling out like sexist jokes, someone being creepy, someone physically or verbally abusive to their partners, to women generally, to staff, and similar things. No, thank you. Why artists and then need to escalate and actually escalate through this process is because they always want to respond harsher. Why? Two reasons. Firstly, they don't want to seem weak if they stop at that point. But secondly, if the feud ends at that specific moment in time, then they seem as a winner because they were the one who had a harsher blow in the end. So at that point, what happens? It's acceptable for these artists to reveal secrets because the celebrity community, no thank you, is likely to take sides when something becomes so public, which means they still keep like half of the people on their side. For example, Drake, who had DJ Khaled on their side, and Kendrick like a Future on his side. Otherwise, if they just release once, people see you as like risky and probably expel you. And at this point, it's very important to keep on this feud, to keep on winning on this huge conflict that actually some people no thank you, no, they can then call them out. They can then call them out for a lot of things. And what happens is that firstly, celebrities when they get called out on the internet, there's huge outrage, and celebrities stop agreeing to do collabs. Secondly, record label sponsors stop supporting you. You lose a platform you use. For example, Kanye that lost Adidas as his main sponsors, and no sponsor the main source of money for like these artists, and not like just some Spotify listeners, but also a lot of fans probably stop supporting you. This is impact of this is firstly principle, twofold. Firstly, you punish those who deserve it to the fullest extent possible, because they have rich lawyers. They will never through the legal system actually get repercussions. The only way is to take away something that means most to them, which is fame, money, and fans. They completely deserve this. But secondly, the fans have the right to know these things. If a fan is listening to an artist, they have a right to know the person who they listen to, who they support, and actually like enable them to prosper and profit. They need to know that person is rapist if they commit sexual harassment and similar things. But also practically, it means celebrities are more scared to do these things, it's a lower incentive to do these things, and it's more likely to have like less sexual harassment, especially as the fan base listens to these things and actually internalizes how horrible this is. When Kendrick tells the young boys how bad it is for someone to be a rapist, they listen to this and are less likely to treat women in their life this way because of all of these reasons. Opposition.
I'd like to thank the first speaker of the opposition was a fine speech at length of 8 minutes and 18 seconds. Now to call upon the second proposition speaker to further the propositions of Santa Cruz.
At the top, I'm going to prove one thing that will largely win us this debate. I'm going to prove that the following of these artists is oftentimes extremely cult-like in nature and makes it hard for opt-out and accountability to occur. Crucially, I'm going to use this line of mechanism to respond to the vast majority of their assertive reconstruction, rebuttal against their material, and it'll deal with some of their material as well. Why is this likely to be cult-like? A few mechanisms. One, oftentimes there's just massive self-glorification that occurs in media. For example, the fact that you portray yourself as always being correct, or the fact that you have immense amount of money to, for example, form media personalities online that allow you to look good. Secondly, because competition between artists oftentimes fosters more attachment to the artist. This necessarily oftentimes occurs before the actual celebrity conflict occurs. On a simple level, on a daily basis, such competition is likely to form cult-like following. Thirdly, oftentimes individuals' media consumption directly forms individual identity. For example, the type of music I consume oftentimes forms the type of person I am, or the personalities I have, and by extension, the people I support. Fourthly, because it's just on a very simple level, it's just very easy to like these people, right? They have cultivated media personalities online. They have Twitter tweets that go through PR personnel. Crucially, this means they make it very easy to like these people. All of this then proves the cult-like following nature of these artists. Crucially, this then responds to a lot of their material, for example, about how collective cancelling makes opt-out easier, because the cult-like nature of such following makes collective cancellation impossible because there's a collective action problem, where because you support them and people around you support them, it's very hard for you to actively voice out against them. This responds to a lot of their material. Let's look at the rebuttal that came against our first argument, for example. Against our first argument, there are four main responses from their bench. The first idea is that the family can take a stance against the person, and therefore they will not face this backlash. At the top, obviously, just because you then disavow your kid doesn't mean that you don't face harm. Like the fact that you put this person on the planet, the fact that you supported them in their past life, in the past few years, for example, are still grounds for you to hate them. But also secondly, it's just not likely that family disavows their kid just after one incident, especially when it's extremely unclear if it's true and it's just a big it's just a big celebrity fight and beef on social media, for example. Their second response then would argue that even if this doesn't happen, it's okay, because the family actually enabled this person. Crucially, on a principal impact level, this is obviously false. These people, no matter whether or not the person who they gave birth to is the murderer, for example, that doesn't give you then grounds to persecute the family who gave birth to this person. But also on a very intuitive and practical level, I don't think this is oftentimes true, because these people didn't create the practical harm for which they, in the court of public jury, are being persecuted for. Thirdly, their third response argues that artists won't do a lot of these things, especially when it's not true, because it's not popular to do. But all of the mechanism for cult-like following proves that it is not only impossible for you to hold these people accountable, but actually is actively popular to do, because these cult-like followers think you are correct and therefore would pick up any information that seems to be correct or seems to be in favor of the artist they support. Their final response that the PR team won't let you is wrong. Obviously, they mechanize all of the popular incentives for the PR team to do this for attention. They try to then get rid of our impact by claiming a lot of stuff about how you can do this symmetrically elsewhere, but we proved to you that the cult-like nature of such following extremely amplifies the scale of impact, and you simply cannot opt out of this just by removing this from your bio. Obviously, hate persists afterwards. In response to our second argument, they would argue that this is easy to spot and therefore suddenly all of these impacts don't happen. The problem with the type of conflict that they instigate, however, is that even if it is easy to spot, it is very hard to punish for because it is impossible to determine whether this is pernicious and malicious in nature or a simple joke between friends. Rap battles can both manifest in a friendly manner where your friends jokingly do roast battles, and in a harmful manner in which in cases of such bullying. So punishments like getting expelled are just very hard to do because it's very easy for the person to justify as a joke. Finally, let me respond to their first argument by proving two things. One, I'm going to prove callout can symmetrically be done in our world, and secondly, I'm going to prove callout is better done in our world. Firstly, why can callout be symmetrically done in our world? Three mechanisms. First, oftentimes there are very legal avenues to the most pernicious scale of harms. For example, if you have evidence that an individual is a child molester, for example, it is much more important that you take the legal avenue out of this rather than you do on social media. Secondly, simple call-out mechanisms that don't lead to celebrity conflict is still okay, because if the party doesn't engage back in the conflict, then celebrity conflict doesn't manifest. Which means if Kendrick still had evidence that Drake was a child molester, it's still fine for him to post that as long as he doesn't then engage into a rap battle or a roast battle or social media posts that amplify the scale of conflict. Call-out is symmetrically possible in our world. Thirdly, you can still do things like tip the manager or the label under which this person is under. And crucially, these labels have incentive to maintain some amount of reputation, which means there's still incentive to care in these situations, especially when the harms are as extreme as they pointed out to be. So we would argue that call-out can just symmetrically be done in both worlds. The second level of response, though, is to argue that call-out is actually better done in our world for two reasons. One, the type of call-outs that that celebrities in opposition world will result to is public call-outs, which oftentimes is not adequate in holding individuals accountable. Drake still has somewhat of a following, despite, for example, the actions that he's being called out for. Crucially then, we would argue it's better that the call-out be done through the legal avenues or through tipping the manager and label which actively harms them rather than on simple social media. And crucially, it's unlikely that both happen at the same time. But also secondly, when there's an absence of celebrity conflict, the call-outs that are important are more likely to get attention in our world because it is more important, it is more obvious, and it is more easy for sensationalization and people to catch on to. Go ahead.
If there is actual evidence, then it's more likely when all of the evidence actually comes to surface to have a stronger case even if you want to sue them in court.
My problem is, how is a rap battle evidence of child molestation, right? Just because I say Drake did something doesn't mean I'm now posting evidence about it. Kendrick never proved his allegations against Drake. Third extending argument then, on artists. I'm going to prove three things. One, worse conflict. Two, the simple harm that manifests from conflict. And three, oftentimes the unjust type of conflict, the unjust harm that occurs. Essentially, this is three claims in one argument. First, why is worse conflict likely? One, because conflict is more likely to heat up in the public sphere. Legal avenues or simple call-outs are less likely to manifest harm as is a public sphere that cult-like followings oftentimes amplifies. But also secondly, because posting on social media then empowers, justifies, and makes it easier for harmful practical actions to be taken. When your fans support your call-out, you are more likely to take harmful action. The second claim then, on the simple harm of conflict. Public beef necessarily incurs harms that do not manifest in, for example, legal avenues. For example, things like career downfall, profit downfall, death threats, bullying, doxing, and stalking to the artists themselves. Crucially, all of this is not just important because it's a practical harm, but the third thing I'm going to prove. We would argue that oftentimes this type of harm is unjust. I'm going to prove firstly why oftentimes the accusations in beef is false. One, because on the incentive level, obviously you have incentive to win and to garner attention, and accountability doesn't apply in these situations. But also secondly, because of the cult-like following that you have, it's just much easier for you to make such accusations to try to win this battle. Crucially then, this necessarily not only creates a practical harm, but also a principal wrong. Much like how the prosecution of an innocent individual is presumably a moral wrong, in the jury of public opinion, the unjust persecution is still a principal wrong. We would argue that the harm that occurs to artists who didn't do anything wrong, just got caught up in the wrong place at the wrong time, is still a harm. For these reasons, propose.
I'd like to invite the second speaker of the proposition for the final speech, a length of 8 minutes and 18 seconds. Now I'd like to invite the second opposition speaker to continue the opposition substantive case.
It is hard to have people be accountable when they have strong PR teams behind them. That when they have PR teams that are going to make a deal, make nothing go out public, and actually not get any benefits of people calling you out. A rich artist who just pays a small fine to another artist for them to not call you out is just will just make it happen that they will not get the accountability that we need on our side. In my speech, I'm going to go through like 3 extraneous points of rebuttal, then my third argument about engineered PR beefs. So first, let's talk about accountability of celebrities. First, I want to tackle their point how there's going to be mostly fake or lying. We want to say that A, there's no incentive for you to actually fake or to have something that is like fake engineered beef, which is not like engineered like for you to like make a deal with another side. There's no incentive to lie because you're gonna have a backlash from them. They're probably gonna dig up something from your own personal life. You don't want to lie if something like that happens. The fans of the other side, because they want to claim you have like cult-like following, they know everything about your life, which means that these people are likely to go out and find information why you are lying. You're gonna have backlash. You're gonna know that you actually had lied. And if something like that is found out, you have much more backlash. You're seen as lame. You're seen as you don't know how to actually rap about anything because you're the one that has to lie to actually gain something out of it. People will not want to listen to you if you're just speaking lies, and it's likely that you're going to have the incentive, you're likely going to be found out. And you have no capacity to actually lie because you cannot like fabricate evidence that people will not find out that it is a lie. But I want to also know there's no incentive to lie as well because everyone did something wrong. Everyone, especially if you're a celebrity, you've probably been being rude to a waiter once, you've probably had a bad day, and people will be able to talk about that, which means that they're not going to fabricate some lies, they're going to talk about things that actually happen. Second point then, can we keep these people accountable? A, on fans. They would try to tell us that you have like a cult-like following, how it's easy to like these people. I want to say that first, you don't have a cult-like following because people of this genre listen to other people as well. You have people who listen both to Kendrick and to Drake. You're not just like in a tunnel vision of just listening to one single person. And secondly, these people are going to see that they're going to see that these bad things that happen, that these artists were like domestic abusers, that they're actually like really rude, or they're actually like sexually assaulted people and children, which means that these people or friends are going to keep these people accountable because they have friends or family or watch movies or can empathize with these people. Even if they support their music, they're not going to support the artist, which means they're going to keep them accountable. But B, I want to see that even if we don't win on fans keeping these people accountable, notice that this didn't tackle our argument because we didn't hinge our argument on fans. We hinged it on record labels and producers not actually supporting this artist. Why these labels are not going to support the artist even if fans continue to do so? Because first, you as a record label or as a producer want other artists, sign up other artists, or you want other important actors to be in your movie. Which means that if it's found out that someone is a domestic abuser, some other if someone from some band is problematic, and that record label signed up that band and another band, people are going to backlash onto the band that did nothing wrong because they're under the record label, which means they're going to go out of the record label because the record label supports someone who is problematic, which means record label is going to lose other not potential, but people they have right now. Record label right now. And 3, if someone made something problematic, they don't know if more evidence is going to resurface later that's going to prove that this person was actually much worse, and fans are going to be mad at this person later, but because this comes in waves. Even if, just like Kendrick Lamar, now doesn't have a lot of backlash, what knows what is going to resurface in a month, and people are going to be mad at him again. Record label doesn't want to actually risk it, which means that our impacts still stand, because the record labels is going to be the ones that's not going to give you promotions, that's not going to actually give you any media coverage, that's the one who's not going to give you any money, not going to give you to actually produce some songs, which means that all the impacts are still manifest on our side. Which means on our side we have the accountability to we have the accountability of celebrities. Third point out of this: why is it unique that we do it online and we cannot do it in private conversations? I want to say that first, they cannot claim that it's going to be. First, they cannot claim that it's going to be on the internet. They're just going to post this on the internet, but not like engage with it, because you have to engage. Your teams are going to have to make some statement, and people are going to start talking about it, which means they cannot cross over the bench and say that they're going to get the benefits that our side is actually talking about. Secondly, I want to tell you there's no incentive for you to call out someone if you're not going to have a monetary benefit out of it. Why would you want to put yourself out in the open, talk about someone being violent, actually risk yourself being in a risky situation that those fans are going to backlash onto you, that you're going to have less record labels when you call out someone? If you will not do this because you're getting no monetary benefit out of it, which means I don't see how they can manifest any of their benefits about this actually being resurfaced. Please, I can take one down.
Sending evidence to the label also incites the fear that going public will lose you fans. This accountability is still symmetric because the fear mechanism still works, even if it's not publicly said.
No, because like I told you that if no one has the incentive for you to call you out, you're afraid you're going to be called out as well. I don't understand how you still have the incentive, since you know that other people will not call you out because you have some dirt on them, which means you have your free reign to do whatever they want because you have some on them. And thirdly, I want to say that victims won't want to call you out, even if they feel like you're bad, because they're afraid that they're the only one. They're afraid they will lose against like a big artist that has a lot of money. Just look at the Me Too movement. Women, even if they were actually harassed, did not come out until other women came and they knew they were not the only ones, which means only on our side we get the benefits of actually this evidence resurfacing when these people have a monetary incentive to actually tell something about it. Which means on our side we have the principle of having more right to information, and we have all the benefits out of it. Second class then about collateral damage. I want to say this first. I want to talk to us how this impacts the family members. A, mitigation. They're already a family member of a celebrity. They're already harassed online. They're not only going to be harassed if they're like in a public feud. They're always someone who hates a certain celebrity, which means you're always going to hate no matter if you have the beef. If you have this beef. B, you're not going to be able to access all the online forums that are actually hating you. You have peer teams who are going to protect you, which means that those people are going to actually be able to gain access to all of these like comments. And C, you're going to have like no physical harm because you're going to be in these gated communities. I don't see how you're going to actually have some harm to actually outweigh the victims that are going to be less victims on our side if we have people seeing that this is not good behavior. Secondly, on fans, I want to say that A, most people don't go online to talk about this, but B, if you picked up some fights online, you're probably in like 30 more fights online, some more of this harassment is not going to be so impactful to you. But I want to say that if you support a problematic person, we want to actually trade off the harms on that person, because if you support a problematic person, you're probably going to be encouraged by their behavior. You're going to be the one who is going to become a domestic abuser. We're going to support a person like that. We want to trade off that we don't want these people actually being in their lives. And then again, about just a few other points about normalizing violence. I don't see how this is unique to their side. People in schools, like kids in schools, always think that someone is cool if someone does violence. We have violent movies online. I don't see how you have unique benefits of just like this, and we want to outweigh this by victims that we have if we don't have accountability. So please oppose.
I'd like to thank the the second opposition speaker for the final speech and invite the third proposition speaker to conclude the proposition substantive case. Here you go.
Is this flowing fine? Yup. I'll start in the next 5 seconds. If you look at the mech dump at opposition, all of their analysis and accountability is basically contingent on our counterfactual, where accountability is minuscule. But if you look at their line of analysis, L even concedes that the accountability measures exist in our world when you talk about how family and the harms to family oftentimes are not going to manifest in our side of the house because of the accountability measure. It's unclear to me why that accountability measure does not exist in favor of our argument to begin with. So the first thing I want to prove is to prove to you why the counterfactual is not as bad as we pointed out in our first speaker. And I want to note, all of the analysis that we provided you in our second speaker is just unresponded to. The fact that we have legal avenues, the fact that we can still call out, because if you look at the motion, this motion is specifically about the prominence. Even without the prominence and the active incentive of those media and its labels to just make the content about beefing, I think you can just call out specific worst forms of action. For example, cheating that they have talked about in your example. All of which means that I think all of the harms are symmetric.
Yeah.
If anything though, we think that the call-outs are better done in our world. Firstly, because people would use the legal avenues more in our world. Because the fundamental assumption in their case is that there's only one way in which you can hold one individual accountable, i.e. the celebrity stupid culture. But in the absence of this culture, the only mechanism is legal avenue, and we think this is more effective insofar as you can use things like police officers, which can oftentimes get the evidence that is actually sufficient for their case. But secondly, I think the attention is zero-sum. In the absence of the celebrity culture, that's when legal avenues actually arise, which is the reason why our counterfactual is just far better. 3 things in this speech. First, an artist. Second, an external hate that the fans face. And thirdly, on conflict. Before that, why not?
Okay, yeah, legal avenues don't work because these are rich people who can just have rich lawyers who find loopholes and never actually be blamed for these things. Know that every celebrity is so rarely actually put in prison because of the things they do.
Just note how unintuitive that claim is. Even rich individuals cannot just go against the state. I think there's just sufficient number of accountability measures insofar as everyone has the voting power. I think politicians care more about electability. Even if you don't buy that or engage in that as well. First things first, let's chat about the artist claim. I think their one-line analysis is to say, oh, backlash from the public is important, and that is when I think the labels care about profit, and that this is the only ways in which you can do so. The first and obvious response to point out is that public accountability measures is symmetric on both sides of the house. Even if you don't have the culture that they have talked about, I think you can still say that you have the evidence on our side of the house, and just fear-monger them that these things might go out in the public, which is the reason why these things still happen on our side of the house. Secondly, and more importantly, this just discredits all of the analysis we provided you from our second speaker on how the most of the individuals that these labels care about are the cult-like followers. Why is it that these individuals care more about the cult-like followers than the general public?
The reason for that is, oftentimes the profit comes from the most proximate fans in the first place, which is the reason why these are the individuals who are likely to go on and just share your beliefs. These are the individuals who are more likely to actually buy tickets for you, which is the reason why the accountability measures, which is the one-liner magic bullet for their side of the house, is unlikely to happen, which is the reason why the premise of your case just falls apart. The second thing they say is that you won't lie on their will because the person will just, fight against the will and then will still lie. The first thing I want to point out is that it's just not contingent on you lying or not. Whether or not you lie doesn't really matter to the point at which they can lie independent of your action, which is the reason why oftentimes individuals will likely have a collective action problem where they have to operate on the worst case scenario, which is why oftentimes a lot of the individuals often resort to lying, and therefore our claim and false accusation still stands at this juncture of the debate. But even if you take all of them, I think they only had two impacts at first opposition. If we were able to just disprove each of them, I think we still win the debate. The first impact is on the principle. They say that this creates a proportionate punishment. One, they never prove why this is properly proportionate. All of our material preempts this when we talk about false accusation happening. One, I think there's an incentive of the labels to create false accusation to begin with. I think this is a good form of entertainment to just, talk about a subjective and speculative thing, all of which means that oftentimes this is a disproportionate punishment flipped in their impact. The second impact they give is about fans' right to know. One, this is still contingent on false accusation. Secondly, I think there's basic levels of privacy that even artists have, which is the reason why this is a more proximate right within the hierarchy of right. Second question on external hate that fans receive. The first thing they say is that hate will happen anyway. One, they just never really respond to the analysis and uniqueness we provided you from first. The difference is the scale and the intensity of harm that exists on both sides of the house. And secondly, I think it's just much more on self-defense. Even if there's a competition of popularity on both sides, these popularities are not as zero-sum as the fact that you are just literally fighting against each other and you are going to lose the conflict in instances you don't fight back, which is why they just miss the entire nuance. The second claim they make is that large harms won't happen due to accountability measures. Seishi already explains that the lines are oftentimes gray. But secondly, it's just much impossible to hold the fans accountable on the sheer number of the fans that exist and the fact that they're anonymous on social media, which is the reason why fans have the capacity to just send slurs to their fans to begin with. The last thing they say is that family can just take a stance and do things like that, and in instances where they support the harms is fine. One, they never prove why this is proportionate again, because oftentimes just raising your child does not really mean that you can get a death threat from your followers to begin with. All of which is the reason why I think their argumentation just really doesn't make sense. Which is why I think our first argument still stands at this juncture of the debate. What was their positive material then? I think their one-liner from second was that other victims can become more empowered to speak out. Firstly, I want to point out at the top that the types of call-outs in beef are not really empowering. I.e., things like yo mama or things like oh you raped a minor isn't a really big thing that a victim wants. Secondly, I'll flip this. This is just demeaning for the victims insofar as this looks like these issues that they really care about are things that are light on the public. They want the legal avenues that uniquely exist in our side of the house. And I would also argue that victims are just emphasized on both sides. It's not really an important argument. On weight, fans are far more important than artists for two reasons. First, on the number of individuals. There's no moral distinction on whether you care about artists or fans, which is why you must resort to number. Secondly, on the scale of impact. Do not underestimate the harm we provided you from first. It was about death threats. It was about the bullying that happens in your schools. And when fans are not used to the harms on a daily basis, that's when these things like death threats are just much more big than what artists go through. Finally, let's talk about the conflict resolution. I think the one-liner response that came from their world was to say, hate is symmetric because the fans support them on both sides of the house. I've already preempted this in two ways that there's a delta. The second thing they say is that there's no physical harm. Again, this is an underestimation of all of our impact because it wasn't just about physical harm. Yes, it was about your roasting, it was about your slurs, it was about the ways in which you cannot resonate and you cannot just resolve the conflict, and it was about you resorting to more pernicious and toxic forms of harm. All of their one-liner response doesn't work, which is a reason why I think the lack of response was damning for their case. On all metrics, proposition clearly takes Go Japan.
All right, and the third speaker of the opposition was a fine speech at length of 8 minutes and 12 seconds. Now to call upon the third opposition speaker to conclude the opposition substantive case. Here.
Drake talking to minors isn't something that's illegal to do. The only way we find out about that and get justice is through accountability on our house. Two main clashes in my speech showing our opposition. One is debate, first on accountability, secondly on collateral damage. But before that, what is this debate really about? Notice it's not about your mama jokes. It's about actual bad things that artists did. For example, talking to minors, beating their wives, and so on. Why? Because these are the most impactful cases that we clearly recognize from our first. Why, through escalation, these conflicts lead to these sort of reputational harms being called out and put to light. First clash then on accountability. Notice we tell you why we get a unique way to get this information out and punish these people. What does the opposition say? Firstly, they tell you that this isn't unique. Then I want to recognize then why we get a unique way to get accountability. Because propositions comparative on accountability is just court. Why is court bad and why doesn't work in these sort of ways? Firstly, because sometimes these things aren't illegal but are morally punishable. Drake talking to minors is able to get punished in court, but this is an action we want to deter other artists from doing, and that's why we need to find it out. They do have no comparative on that point. Secondly, we tell you that the courts just don't work on these artists. Why? Because these are extremely rich people. They have hush money. Insofar as they beat their wife, they rape someone, they sexually harass someone, they will just offer them millions of dollars to just stay silent. This is something that happens in the status quo. Yes, if someone murdered my grandpa, I would want a man in prison. But if that same murderer offered me $5 million, I would keep shush because that's just money that's good for me, and that's money that I can use to get better things in my life. But also, they just have better lawyers that just very often get them out of prison even if they don't offer hush money. Why do we then get a unique way to get information? Notice it must come from popular artists. Otherwise, people just won't listen to them. Why? Because they have good PR teams and they have a cult-like following, just as proposition mechanisms from you. Notice I also explained why it can come from government. So the only way to get this information, to get accountability, is to give other artists incentives to call each other out. We provide the most obvious incentive, and that's profit, right? Like insofar as you call out someone by making a song that's going to be insanely popular, you just get yourself money. Notice why is this profit incentive necessary? Why they can just post on Twitter, oh, Drake is a pedophile? Because they just won't care otherwise. They necessarily aren't that close friends. They likely just don't care about the fact that he talked to minors and so on. But B, you always face a risk of harms happening to you, right? Because someone can always retaliate. If Kendrick just posted, oh, Drake is a pedophile, there was a huge risk of Drake just retaliating, and then they both go into a lose-lose scenario. Yes, this risk exists in status quo, but A, they can justify it because yes, you risk losing some friends and someone retaliating, but you also get a lot of money in return. That's a profitable incentive for you, incentive that doesn't exist on their sort of house. But B, B, at the point, this only happens at the point when you're deep in the beat, right? Like desperate to this point, and now you don't want to back out on Arsenal House because you just risk losing the beat and seeming weak. That's why even if it's risky, you still do it on Arsenal House, but on Arsenal House you don't do it. Notice I just proved you why we have a unique way to get accountability on Arsenal House. They cannot just co-opt this with by saying, oh, we get government's help. So I'll take that PY.
The incentive is symmetric, not just because there's competitive incentive, but also not reporting crimes oftentimes just implicates you in the crime as well.
No, it doesn't implicate you. It's very hard to prove that Kendrick knew about these things, but also there's no profit incentive on their house. You just go into a lose-lose scenario with both of you. You have no positive impact on the artist reporting the crime. Then they tell you, oh, but this call-out culture just doesn't work because these people have a cult-like following. I want you to notice this is largely untrue, right? Because no one is a diehard Drake fan, you're just a diehard rap fan, which means you'll be listening to both Kendrick and Drake. But B, this is largely unresponsive to our material, because our accountability isn't hinged on these people losing their listeners, but rather it's being dropped by their record labels. But and notice this still happens, because why does the record label drop you? They want to sign other artists that likely don't want to cooperate with the one that's being implicated in these sort of harms, so the record label must choose, they likely choose the majority. But B, you have the fans from other artists that don't have cult-like followings toward the original ones, also backlash against the record label, don't want to cooperate with them, don't want to purchase their products, their music and so on, if they don't drop the artist. This is why it happens. We see this in Status Quo, where Adidas literally dropped Kanye West, even though he still has a ton of monthly listeners. Then they tell you, okay, but sometimes you lie. Why you don't lie? Because you want to show evidence. Insofar as the other fans have cult-like following towards the artist, and you want to convince them that he's doing this sort of harm and a bad thing, you show active evidence for it, because otherwise you won't be able to convince anyone. This why false accusations are largely unpopular. Lastly, they tell you, oh, but we can't punish them as people. We can, because I just proved to you that when courts don't work, this means that the only other possibility is to punish them as people. But B, we have a right to information. Here they tell you, oh, but no, these people have a right to privacy. No, insofar as your right, insofar as if you don't give someone any information, their life is significantly harmed. You give them, you owe them to give them information. For example, if I have an STI, I owe it to someone to tell them I have an STI before having sex with them, because this will largely impact their lives. I want to weigh off why this is the most important point insofar as we prove it. On justice. This is the only way to give these people justice. This is a core principle in society. Insofar as these people did these bad things, they did these crimes, we ought to punish them at any expense possible. I want to weigh it off, especially this with collateral damage, right? I don't care if fans suffer or families suffer in the process. I care more about justice. Why? Because we do this in the status quo every single time. Insofar as someone, as a man supports his family working two jobs, but he rapes someone, I would still put him in jail because he did a bad thing, even though his family will suffer. They won't be able to pay rent that month. They won't be able to feed themselves. I don't care. A rapist should be put in jail and should be punished. But B, on practicality, we get the biggest practical harm avoided in this debate, right? Artists just become much more careful on National House. They just avoid doing these things. This means just less people, get sexually harassed and so on. Second clash then on collateral damage. Opposition has 2 points here. On families, where we tell you this rarely happens. Why? Because proposition framed this debate about big actors. Notice they have PR teams and managers. These teams won't allow the artists to attack the families or just call out someone for being gay, because this is seen as a weak, as a low blow. Especially because the other artists will call you out. Why are you attacking my family instead of me? Are you weak? You have nothing to prove against me. This way you attack the person directly. But B, this can also backfire, right? Because your fans won't support you insofar as just attack innocent families. We saw this happen every time with Eminem's daughter. When someone attacked her, they lost massive popularity. But also there's little impact here, and I can trade this off. Why? Because they are detached from fans. These are rich people who go to private schools. They live in gated neighborhoods. Nothing can really happen to them. But also they get harassed very often online. Insofar as they just connected to these artists, if they give a bad song. So I don't think there's much delta here. So for all these reasons, please oppose.
I would like to thank the third opposition speaker for a fine speech, a length of 8 minutes and 18 seconds. Now, to conclude the opposition case, I would like to invite the opposition reply speaker to deliver a speech no longer than 1 minute. Stay here.
I think that Japan cannot win this debate by trying to outweigh some more bullying in schools by thousands of lives of people who have been constantly under the oppression of domestic abusers, of people who are afraid to come out because they were sexually assaulted. I cannot see how this can be a winning case for the side of proposition, so I just want to do a little weighing and say why we clearly win this debate. First, let's talk about accountability of artists. One, why is private not enough? We told you that Japan never proved that victims will have an incentive to come out and engage in a lawsuit. We told you they will be afraid someone will dig up the dirt from them if they engage. They're afraid they will lose because they're going up against a large artist and they will lose money and time and face in a lengthy lawsuit. We all debated a law case one day ago. We're aware how these cases can be dragged out. People don't want to engage with them. We told you that only if people are going to come out if they have a monetary incentive, and they will only have this monetary incentive if they can actually make music, make art out of it, have Twitter and gain more following. That can only happen on our side, that people will actually come out. We told you that B, even if they have the incentive, we told you that it is not likely that this is going to happen because we have some large artists that have large PR groups that can actually twist this. Because if the conflict is in pop culture and all around you, you cannot escape it. But if it's doing it in a private room, you can actually escape it because PR teams can just hide it and make something else, make you release another music so you can actually hide this. You cannot say they will be able to keep these artists accountable on their side. Secondly, under the accountability, is it likely for these things to be false and that you're lying about these things? We told you that why would you risk backlash? So there are other people digging up your dirt. You seem lame and losing actually fans if you're found out. But you can just reveal things that they have actually done. Because every artist, they're rich. They've been surrounded with drugs. They've been surrounded with other rich people. They likely have done something. You're likely to call out those things rather than risk your whole career. Thirdly, why are we the only ones that actually get the accountability? We told you that labels will not want to sign you up because they're afraid of backlash. Because no, labels hire more than just one artist under their label. So even if they prove they have the fans, like cult-like following of this one person, is still going to support the label. Label still wants to have other artists, or a director wants other producers, or other like actors under him. They cannot just rely on just one cult-like base, which means that we are the ones that actually get the backlash of these people actually removing funding to these artists and actually giving them backlash they deserve by not giving them the media space, by having them less money, not able to progress their career as they want to. So I just want to say why this outweighs any of the collateral damage they try to push onto us. Because first, they try to push onto us families. We say that they're rich, they have PR teams that actually shield them from these kinds of stuff, and they're already a family member of a celebrity. This is not going to be a so much greater impact on them. Secondly, on fans, we told you that if you engage with these kinds of content, you're likely engaging with other kinds of content which can actually bring you backlash not so impactful. And we want to flip this. If you're not accountable, we're okay that you actually get some backlash because we don't want you to become like those who you support. And thirdly, on artists, we say that even if some artists are wrongfully accused because they're rich, because they have good PR teams, they're not going to be the ones who suffer a lot because of this. So I just want to wait. So I want to say that this is like a trade-off we're willing to make. So why do we win? Because of the intensity of our impact. Because if we prove to you that we have the accountability on these people, we say that artists are going to be deterred from doing stuff like this. They cannot just hide behind their money and just continue being domestic abusers, continue being pedophiles and having so much victims under them just because they're rich. We deter these people because they are afraid they're going to get called out. And B, we have less other people who are going to be encouraged by these kinds of behavior because they see their favorite artists going away and not getting punished because of all of these things, which means that they are less likely to actually continue with this violence. Because these are victims of domestic abuse, they're not like kids being bullied in schools. Please oppose.
I'd I'd like to thank the opposition reply speaker who was a fine speech and had a length of 4 minutes and 12 seconds. Now to conclude the debate as a whole, I'd like to invite the proposition reply speaker. Here.
First on the clash of accountability. From prop, we argued that we actually do callouts better for two reasons. The first reason was that we force individuals to choose better, more accountable and effective callout mechanisms. The point is that public accountability is oftentimes useless. Drake is still rich, still employed at his label, and still popular despite his actions and despite the public accountability that came. We would argue that the types of accountability methods that we incentivize are just better. But also secondly, on zero-sum attention, because actual callout is actually empowered in our world rather than crowded out by random hate and media frenzy. We would argue that we do callouts better. Their mechanism for doing callouts better is largely on the level of incentive, i.e. that there's higher incentive to call out in their world due to the profit incentive. From POI, we pointed out that the incentive is largely symmetric. One, oftentimes there's still just competitive incentive to outcompete other people in the same market that you are in, but also secondly, that not pointing out or not reporting oftentimes implicates you. Maybe this is not criminally, although oftentimes it is if you look at, for example, these parties, but also just on the level of public court, we would argue that it still implicates you in a lot of ways. We would argue then that the incentive to call out is symmetric. On the actual whether we can do call out symmetrically in our world level, we would argue that this washes out at worst for three reasons. One, we told you that legal avenues exist, and though there's a mirage of responses that come from their world about how there's a lot of like non-illegal, immoral things, the actual worst case harms are always going to still be illegal. We are still going to be able to persecute, and even if victims don't come out, we can still anonymously report things, etc. We would also pose that the second and third alternatives still work. Our second alternative about how we can still call out on social media without having to instigate conflict and create a rap battle about it, and this would still create accountability. And we told you that we could still go to the label, and this still creates the same fear of this information going public without the information actually having to go public, and they will still then, according to their mechanism, would care. Second clash then, on innocent individuals. The first thing is innocent celebrities. And we would argue that innocent celebrities getting called out is a fairly large problem. And their level of response on the incentive is to argue that you don't want the other side to attack you and the other cult-like members to attack you for the lack of evidence. The problem is not only do a lot of these celebrities never have to and never do publish their evidence, but also not demechanizes why you are more likely to care about your own cult-like following than you would the other side. On the level of capacity, they would argue that PR teams don't allow this. But not only is there profit incentive to allow this, but you can create plausible deniability or gray areas by doing things like what Kendrick does by saying he's probably a minor and not actually a minor. This impact is important. Even if these people are rich, and even if these family members are used to it, we would argue that rich people can still face harm. Suicide rate among celebrities is higher than the average job, and you're not really used to it. You're a family member. Families rarely get attacked. You don't know Taylor Swift's mom, but if Taylor Swift was in a rap battle, the mom would get attacked, and fans don't have any of these mechanisms anyway. So fans then, are they even innocent? Because they would argue that there's no moral distinction between a murderer and the family of a murderer. The problem is, there is obviously not only a moral distinction between active harm and not, but also sometimes you just don't know about this until it goes public, and you're still able to get attacked for it. You can't punish people from not being constantly online. The harm is fairly real as well, and they would like to say doxing is not possible from a distance. That's literally just what doxing is, but just on a principle level as well, we mechanize why this is principally wrong. Third and final thing in the speech though, for the average person, we would argue that the types of conflict that they promote are harmful, not just because you instigate more conflict, but the way by which that conflict occurs, or the fact that you will never end these conflicts. We posed 3 reasons why this was unique to no response from their side. We told you about the coolness of this. We told you how hard it is to realize it's bad when it's glorified and made as entertainment rather than portrayed as harmful in daily life. And we talked about the accessibility by which you get this type of information. We would argue this is a massive mental harm, especially because it's very hard to opt out of these types of conflicts, because when other people instigate it, it seems like you're weak for opting out. We would argue this is a real harm that Natsuki weighed from his whip as well. For these reasons, propose.
why speakers, if I speak for like 4 minutes and 14 seconds and all this is going around. Just 2 points. If you can leave first and then obviously make friends across the floor, but also like be conscious that there are other debates going on. So like if you're going to talk, just like be aware of where the rooms are. Don't go too far away, but just be aware of the room. Thank you.
Thank you.
So